Did we start? Okay, great. I'm very happy and very excited to be here with you today on this webinar where we are meeting all together in the Southeast Europe together with the SVRI network to connect, to share and to learn from each other. I'm very pleasant that there are so many people who applied for this webinar, and I really hope that we are going to have a very interesting discussion. I would like to tell you that this webinar is going to be recorded, so I would like that everyone is okay with that. Please nod if you agree. And also, I would like to tell you that we are going to be here for 2 hours with one short break, lasting about 5 minutes. If anyone has any questions, please do use the chat for asking questions, and we will answer you as soon as we finish with the presentations. Also, there are so many speakers today, so we are really going to try to be very short and to keep this dynamic very active. So the idea for this webinar came from this wonderful opportunity that we had last year as a part of Belgrade University, who participated in the research violence against children on Western Balkan route, where we mapped the experience of the children traveling in the Western Balkan route. And one of we were grantees of the SVRI network, and we had the opportunity to meet with SVRI actually in the SVRI forum. So that was one of the best conferences I've ever attended to, with the opportunity to connect with many people, to learn a lot of new approaches, and also to attend the conference, which is trauma-informed and which is completely novelty in the area of violence against women and children conferences and the research in our region. So what I also saw there is that there is not enough representatives, or almost not at all, coming from the Southeast Europe. And I already knew that there are so many people, also many of them are not with us right now, but many people who are dealing with the violence against children and violence against women in our region. And we have a lot of things to offer and a lot of things to share. So I guess that the time came that we connect with each other and that we also connect with this wonderful network and see the opportunities that are for us maybe later in the future that will open up, hopefully. So the agenda goes like this. After this short introduction, I will just give Lisa the floor. So she would ask us to just give some information in the word cloud, and then we will go to the presentation of the introduction of the SVRI coming from Elizabeth Dartnell. She will tell us much more about the network, the opportunities, their scope of work, and then we will have a short introduction about violence across Balkans. And after that, we will have a short break, and we will continue with the discussion in the introduction of the organizations coming from Balkans with their scope of work, but also with the challenges and the gaps and opportunities to work together. We will also have the closing, short closing with resuming of what we've got today here, and maybe to have some ideas for the further steps. So I hope that we hear each other very well. If you have any questions, please use the chat box. And if you have any difficulties, please let us know. So I would like now to ask Elizabeth to introduce herself and to introduce the SVR. Oh, before you, I'm sorry, I forgot about this word cloud. Can you please, Liesl, introduce yourself and share word cloud with us?
Thank you, Anita. Hi, everyone. I'm Liesl. I am the Partnership Specialist for the SVRI. And what we would like to know from you today, please do introduce yourselves via the chat. We'd love to know who you are, where you are. And we'd also like to just hear one word. I've put in a link to our Mentimeter word cloud. So if you can give us one word on why it is important for us to work together. If you don't have access to a Menti or you can't get on, you can also paste it in the chat for us, no problem. I'll also put in a code if you need it, but just why it is important for us to work together in one word. The link is in the chat. Thank you, Anita. Shall I hand it to Liz?
Yeah, yes, please. I'm writing in the word cloud at the moment. So,
please do use the word cloud.
I'm so excited because there are too many words that I would love to share here. Liesl, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anita, and thanks, Liesl. And thank you all for the invitation to be here with you all today to discuss building networks in Southeast Europe, and really for providing us, the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, an opportunity to share our work with you. So for those of you who don't know the S4I, next slide, Liesl, with over 8,000 members, we are the world's largest global network working to advance research on violence against women and violence against children in low and middle income countries. We were established in 2003 on the shoulders of really passionate researchers and practitioners who really recognize the deep inequity between research flows between high income countries and low and middle income countries, which showed us that most resources for research sit in high-income countries, with very limited research resources sitting in low and middle-income countries, with even less of those research resources being led by researchers in low and middle-income countries. And so we work to increase research and research resources on violence against women and violence against children in low and middle-income countries. And we do this around these 4 pillars: building evidence, strengthening capacity, promoting partnerships, and influencing change. And every 2 years we host the S4I Forum, which we've had the honor to meet some of you already that are on this chat at the forum, and to work with you on some of our building evidence work. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we do. Next slide, please, Liesl. But first, I just want to talk about what we know about the size of the problem, the investment, and some of what we know works, doesn't. And I don't like to talk about what works because actually many things work in different ways, but in different settings. But what do we know that drives this type of violence? And I think many of you in this room know this, but I'm going to go through this just so we're all on the same page. We're all aware of the scale and the universality of violence against women globally. 1 in 3 women, for example, experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and an estimated 137 women are killed by a family member daily. And these rates worsened during the pandemic. We know, however, unfortunately, the current investment in violence prevention does not match the size of the problem. And even less money is invested in knowing what works and what doesn't to improve the lives of women and girls globally. This is a problem for us in the field of knowledge production, especially given the importance of research to inform policy and practice, and the importance of evidence-based and evidence-informed intervention programs to improve lives of women and girls. And as a field, I really ask us all to join together to advocate for more and better resources for research on violence against women. And I'm going to repeat that message throughout this short presentation on our work. Next slide, please, Liesl. In building programs, we must really innovate on what we know work. And that's why networks like this are so important, and sharing research is so important. And we do know a lot, and a lot is going on in different regions in the world. We know that we can prevent violence against women, and I believe violence against children, in a matter of years, or program years, not decades, and not generations. For example, in the violence against women field, the UK government funded program, the What Works to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls, found several programs effective in reducing violence against women. In the DRC, for example, a social norms intervention involving faith leaders and community action groups was found to reduce violence in the intervention arm from 69% down to 29%. And a community-based social norms program in Uganda called SASA, where community activists addressed the imbalance of power between men and women in communities, was found to reduce violence in the intervention communities by 52%. We need to understand and build on what it is about these programs that make them effective. But I'm going to just to note and to highlight, nowhere in the world have we been able to reduce violence against women and violence against children down to zero. That is our challenge as a field. Next slide, please, Liesl. I'm talking a lot about the evidence of violence against women, but there is a lot of evidence-based violence against children, but I'm focusing on the violence against women work because we have a lot of the What Works program has been quite powerful in building our evidence base. To effectively end violence against women, programs must understand and dismantle what drives this violence. A study building on the work done through the What Works program, done by Andy Gibbs and team, shows us that men's use or perpetration of violence against their partners is driven by poverty, patriarchal privilege, and the normative use of violence against their partners in their households and interpersonal relationships. Factors that also increase the likelihood of perpetration include childhood trauma, being exposed and witnessing violence in the home, poor mental health and substance misuse, poor communication and conflict in relationships, as well as disability status, and of course armed conflict and post-conflict further reinforces and makes this violence even worse. Next slide, please. So what is it about our interventions? What are the essential shared elements of effective interventions? Because the design of our program is as essential to their success as what is in our programs. Again, the What Works program found 10 core elements of the design and implementation programs that are essential to success. Programs must have a strong theory of change, include both men and women. By working with men separately from women is not as effective as working with both men and women. Using participatory approaches, of course, addressing those deep social norms of gender inequality and equity, supporting survivors, providing user-friendly manuals. And we also know that longer interventions with more activities is more effective than shorter interventions, and ensuring that the facilitators that drive those interventions is part of the magic sauce that makes these interventions effective. And of course, we know that we need to program across multiple risk factors. So optimizing the design and implementation of our programs is vital to preventing violence against women. And these have to be considered when we're developing and or adapting programs to different contexts. Next slide, please. Because we are caring about what works to prevent violence against women and violence against children and what works to ensure appropriate resources for violence against women and children, what do we need to think about when we want to strengthen the evidence base? And why do we still need research? Well, just to remind you, no intervention has reduced violence against women to zero at all. We also have very few interventions that have been sustainably taken to scale to really shift those deeply entrenched social norms that drive this violence, promote gender inequitable societies, and to reduce violence over the long term. Knowledge is still limited on the long-term effects of these interventions and what specific mechanisms actually drive their success. And we know little about how to integrate violence prevention and response efforts into those large development programs. And of course, as we all know, knowledge remains clustered in high-income countries, and we need to support the pockets of excellence of research that's being done in low- and middle-income countries, resource them properly and support them. There's also a whole issue around funding gaps and challenges, and the investments that we often receive as women's rights organisations or organisations, NGOs, universities and civil societies is very small. And we have to acknowledge that there is a trust gap, I believe, we believe, the field believes, and we have to understand what we're working against. There's an opposing field of anti-gender equality and anti-feminist movements who get large amounts of unrestricted funds, unlike what we receive. And they get unrestricted funding over long periods of time, sometimes 30 to 40 to 50 years in length. That's impossible for us to fight against. And this is also a part of a trend which has been called the global trust gap, and means that often the funding that's meant to benefit low and middle income countries is given to high-income country researchers to do the research in low and middle-income countries. And we think that there might be a trust gap, and we need to also redress that and reinforce and reassure and make sure that advocate for the resources to go where the research resources need to be. So what are we doing to try and address these challenges that we see in the field? So we're going to talk about our 4 areas of work. Next slide, please. Our first pillar I spoke about was building evidence, and we do that in 4 ways. We work to support research, drive innovation, promote knowledge exchanges, and we target low and middle income countries. We believe to create change, we need to be working with researchers in low and middle income countries and practitioners to work out what works and turn that knowledge into practical solutions. And we think that through our grant making efforts, we are supportive of innovative, priority-driven research that will build on the evidence needed to create and improve policy and programs. We also believe that research helps reveal what we need to do differently or better and seek to contribute to new knowledge and trends in the field, issues around innovation, localization, decolonization, and we really foster knowledge exchanges and strategic alliances around these types of debates in the field. And of course, the greatest of burdens of this type of violence does lie in low and middle income countries. And so that's where we have the fewest resources, and we really work hard to funnel support and funding to these regions of the world. Next slide, please. I just want to talk a little bit about our grant making. We started in 24 with a small pot of funds, and we basically, and our current program provides grants ranging from $40,000 to about $150,000 over a 1.5 to a 2-year period. We put out a call every year, and it'll be coming out in hopefully May, June this year, and maybe even earlier. So join our update. I'll talk about that in a bit. And once the proposal is approved, we continue to work with our partners. As you can see, we're still working with Anita and Sonia, who's also on this call. We don't leave you. You become part of the network as a grantee of the S3RI. And we really work hard to share technology, experiences, knowledge between the grantees and between the S3RI and the grantees, and between the S3RI grantees and the field. We provide platforms for disseminating your research and networking to ensure that your research really can meet those people with the power that can influence change. Next slide, please, Liesl. We're also home to, so just to highlight where we've been grant making over the past the years of our grant making. As you can see, a majority of our grants have gone to Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean, with only 8% of our grants going to Europe and Central Asia. And I don't have the sort of nuance of East and South Asia, East and South Europe, but it would be really good for you to share our work, and that we do have this grant making call, and to try and increase this number amongst your networks, because we really want to ensure that research is supported, funded, and done well and networked well within all regions of the world, particularly low and middle income countries. Next slide, please. The S3RI also has a knowledge hub. We're home to a platform where you can find resources related to violence against women and violence against children. And we're happy to share your materials here if you send them to us. And Liesel's going to share all the links with you after the presentation. We also have multiple social media platforms. And we also have the S3RI update, which Liesl will talk about a little bit more, where we put out a weekly update on what's current in the field of violence against women and violence against children. So please do share your resources, and we will share it with our 8,000 members that I spoke about. Next slide, please. Strengthening capacity is pillar 2. We really believe that the science of research into violence against women and violence against children is a growing field. It's relatively new, and we really want to build and strengthen the capacity that exists in low and middle income countries. And we really also want to advance and create a field that's care and kinding for young researchers to join the field and stay in the field. And we want to ensure that research remains and continues to remain ethical, relevant, and rigorous. So we support researchers in terms of capacity strengthening. Particularly, we provide a training workshop that's co-created with grantees that identifies what the gaps are within the grantee cohort, but also what the grantees can provide the other cohorts. And that runs over a couple of months because we do that online. We also run medium to long-term projects that aim to strengthen skills and capacities and knowledge in the field. We hold capacity strengthening webinars and events. And through the forum, we actively mentor and support new and emerging researchers through our Young Professionals program and also through our bursaries program. And we hold workshops at the conference, which Lisa will talk about. We've just launched a series of online workshops, one on measurement of violence against children, which I think this group might be interested in. It's a great tool. One on research uptake, how to ensure your research findings really make the impact that you want, because we don't do this work just for academic gain. We do it because we really want to make change. As well as an online course on care and collective care within our field, because we know we do this work because we care, and often we care so much that we burn out. So how do we ensure that the field remains vigorant, vibrant, and continues to do the work well? Okay, next slide, please, Liesl. I'm going to hand over to Liesl to talk about promoting partnerships.
Thank you, Liz. So just under promoting partnerships, so institutionally, we aim to build partnerships with actors whose work really intersect with ours, and where working together can mean that we can achieve more. So no one individual or organization, as we all know, can solve complex problems like violence against women and violence against children, and we must work in partnership. And so we reach out to other disciplines, to groups, including the private sector, to explore multi-component interventions to transform problematic social norms together. So under our promoting partnerships, I would just like to touch on the forum and the membership and update. And yes, I'll share the links to the webinars and workshops that we have hosted. So with the forum, this is a key component of our partnership strategy. And the forum is the world's key conference in the sector. It's usually held every 2 years, providing an inspiring and safe space for everybody to come together and discuss and exchange. It really is an amazing platform. So it usually takes place over 5 days. And over these 5 days, we have 1 day of skills building workshops. We have 3 days of conferencing, and the Friday is generally dedicated to participant-driven events, or what we usually know as satellite events or side events. So the forum really offers a space also for exhibitors to come and showcase their work, for networking, we're known as the networking space in the field, and for self and collective care. So diversity and inclusion is also a key priority for the forum. And here we aim to ensure that our efforts to make the SVRI forum a diverse space is to award a limited amount of bursaries to practitioners and researchers working on violence against women and violence against children in low and middle income countries, and also to young and emerging researchers and practitioners who would not be able to attend the conference. We also encourage our northern partners to ensure that their southern-based partners attend and present at the forum. So I just want to show you a little bit about SVRI Forum over time. You can see how it's really, this vibrant learning event has grown so immensely over the years, and it's something we're really proud of. So our very first conference was hosted in 2009 with 194 delegates. That was in South Africa, and you can see how it's grown. Last year in Mexico, we had 1,021 delegates from 99 countries, which was really a record number and just so much fun to bring everybody together. So Anita has also recently written a really lovely review of the forum from last year in the Serbian journal Temida, and I'll share the link after this presentation as well. So what is great about the forum? So over the past 7 conferences, we have learned some really valuable lessons in serving the field. This is a really unique conference. The niche on research is really, really unique to us. And a partner yesterday in a meeting said, with the forum, you have gold in your hands. Just talking about the extraordinary knowledge and sharing opportunities that the platform provides, especially for researchers and practitioners working to end violence against women and children. So from the 2022 evaluation, we've just kind of like compressed all of our, just what people have said. And this also resonates with what was said in previous conferences in the evaluations. So there you can see people really appreciated the learning and the diversity of evidence that was presented. Last year, we had 341 presentations on research, on practice, programs, policy from a variety of sectors and from a variety of different disciplines. There was also a diversity of voices in the panels. We, for the very first time, hosted what we call dialogic panels, so really discussing and debating current issues and relevant issues. We had 2 last year on power and control between high income and low income countries in research, and also on practice-based knowledge. So networking, of course, like I've said, we are known as the space that really dedicate time to connection and to networking, and we really do put a lot of effort into this. And we also offer tailored activities for self and collective care. And this is usually between sessions, after and before. We also offer a space because it's so busy and there's so many panels running concurrently. We also offer a space where people can rest and reflect in a space that we call our brave room. So delegates always appreciate the diversity and attention to detail, such as the translation, the pronoun stickers that we have, the care and dietary requirements for different religions, and so on. And also the deliberate spotlight that we put on young and emerging researchers. We really ensure that young voices have a space on the program, and that we also give them awards at the end. So we have an award ceremony where we celebrate and amplify their work. Last year, we also saw quite a big increase in women's rights organizations and activist groups at the forum, and we really tried to also create a space where they feel safe and where we can welcome their voices as well. So we do hope to see you at Forum 2024. It will take place in South Africa in October 2024. The details have not yet been finalized, but we do know that the forum, the abstracts will open around August, September. So we do encourage everybody to please keep that on your agenda, send in your work for review so you can participate. It's going to be an absolutely great conference once again. Yeah, then just in terms of our membership, like Liz said, we have over 8,000 members. They are from across all regions in the world. So these are usually practitioners, researchers, policymakers, donors, activists, and more. And what we aim to do is to really build and grow a network where people can collaborate in a kind and caring way to design thoughtful and effective solutions for ending war and VAC. So over the years, we have been working to increase the areas where we don't have a strong network. And we really would love to grow the Europe and Central Asia region and build a strong community. So I will put a link in the chat where you can subscribe to our network. Please share your work, whether it's we share in all languages from every region. So please do send it. We'll include it in our weekly update. And if there's anyone that you want to be connected to, we are able to help you with that as well. So I'm going to hand it back to Liz now to talk about our influencing change pillar.
Thank you so much, Liesl. So pillar 4 of our work is influencing change, and we really aim to strengthen decision makers and funders' understanding of why research is critical for policies and programs. And I'm sure this group don't really need to have that discussion because we all care deeply about evidence. So we work to influence policy and practice by building knowledge amongst funders and other key influencers on how to prevent and how to improve responses to violence against women and children using evidence. And how are we doing that? Well, first of all, we've been mapping funding for research on violence against women in low and middle income countries, and we haven't done it for violence against children. Other partners have done that. We've mapped what overseas development aid is being put towards research on violence against women in low and middle income countries, and this won't be a surprise to anybody on this webinar that very little funding is going to violence against women programming, and even less is going to understand what works and what doesn't in low and middle income countries. And as a field, as a group, as a network, we really need to be advocating for more and better research resources to be put towards this important, really important issue. We've also been engaging funders on what does more and better resources look like. We've worked with them over a few years to develop a guide to promote good practices for funding research on violence against women and violence against children in low and middle income countries. And we'll share that guide, a link to that guide in the chat. But importantly, we're going to be working over the next few years to really work out how to implement this guidance, how to support funders and researchers and practitioners to advocate for and to implement good funding practices. We've also been working collaboratively to identify research priorities for funding. We believe, and I hope it's true, that researchers do help research in our field to develop in a more systematic way and to ensure that the research efforts put limited resources to best effect. Research resources are really expensive, and we really need to make sure that they are making a difference to the issues that have been identified by communities on the ground that are important. That being said, historically, most research priority processes or research agendas are set by the most senior researchers very far removed from the communities that research is meant to serve. Thus, we've been working to adapt what is called a wisdom of the crowd or a Chinri method to co-create research agendas collaboratively with multiple diverse groups and voices to ensure that no longer, it's not okay anymore that the most senior, the most loudest in the room sets the agenda. And we really believe that these agendas can be powerful tools to advocate for more resources. That being said, we've been developing agendas for a global shared research agenda. We're working regionally with UN Women and UNICEF Innocenti and WHO for topic-specific work, as well as regional agendas in Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa. And we would love to do one in the Middle East and North Africa unit and Europe and Central Asia. And we will try and mobilize resources to do that. Next slide, please. So some final reflections. So all of us here are really passionate about and committed to ending violence against women and violence against children and creating a gender equitable world. And we think to really think about change, we need to think and reflect on who and what is getting funded and why. And we need to advocate for more localization and decolonization of research methods and tools, and research funding. We have to ensure that research funding is informed by the existing knowledge that we have, the evidence base, is guided by research agendas that's been developed by the field, for the field, and answers a policy imperative. And that it's done in partnership to ensure that local communities, local voices, local policymakers, practitioners, women's voices and children's voices are centered in the process of research, including what is the research question, how is the research conducted, how is it shared and disseminated, analyzed, who gets to do the fun stuff of analyzing the data and writing up the data. And we really need to take some time to think through that trust gap and support researchers in low and middle income countries in the same way researchers in high income countries are supported and resourced. We need, as a field in low and middle countries, well, everywhere, even high income countries, this is no difference, I think, in this point, that more longer term flexible funding is needed that goes to core resources and allows us to define our own agendas and our own work, what we think is important. That's informed by our communities and colleagues. But we mustn't forget that we really need to take time to celebrate the progress made, be mindful of the challenge that we still need to face, and remind ourselves the importance of self and collective care for activism, sustained work, and change. So this is our call to you, and thank you for this opportunity to have this call to action. Whether you are a researcher, a practitioner, activist, policymaker, we invite you to join us, the S3RI, our community of diverse global voices committed to addressing violence against women and violence against children, and to advocate for more and better resources for this really important work. Thank you. And I'm going to hand back to Anita too. I'm sure what you're all waiting to hear about is the research that's being done in Serbia.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Liesl. This is such an abundant scope of work you have shared with us, and it really makes me feel empowered to go and to learn more, to research more, and to have more significant findings in the area. So thank you. I do think that people also will be very empowered to discover the SVRI network more deeply. I'm a part of it, and I receive newsletters very often, and I have collected so many very good materials, not only from the part of the research, but also very valuable interventions and descriptions and blogs and experiences, and also connections with people, which resulted that we even created together already a project. So I'm very grateful to be part of this network, and I do invite everyone from this region to join and to enjoy the benefits of working together and sharing knowledge. So now I would like to invite my two colleagues, Mariana and Violetta, to share us some insights about the findings of violence against children and violence against women in Balkans. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, I hope you can hear me and that you can see my presentation, our presentation. Hello, as Anita said, my name is Violetta Markovic. I will be presenting a little bit about the context of violence against children and women in the Balkans, specifically focusing on the case studies of Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and my colleague Mariana will present Albania. Before I start, I really want to stress the importance of doing further research in this area in the Balkans. I was struggling very much to find information because the research on this topic is so scarce, the data is so disintegrated in different agencies, and I will be talking about the reason for this more. Even though most of us or all of us know about the consequences that violence has on children, I think it's important, as Elizabeth said, for us to be on the same page in this matter. So I really want to stress how violence and exposure to violence has a long-term consequence negative long-term consequences on physical and mental health. It is linked usually to harsh parenting and abusive behaviors towards children. All these findings are independent of country, cultural context, so they are universal. We can say universal for each country, including the Balkan countries. This topic of violence against children has attracted some international attention and is now part of the Sustainable Development Goals. The context of violence against children in the Balkans, as I said, it was really difficult to find some data that would present the situation in the Balkans and also in the individual countries, but there is some research. One of those research is this one presented here, which was a three-stage stratified random sample research done with 42,194 school-attending children about their experience of violence. So they were measuring violence on a self-reported scale. So children were the ones who were reporting on the violence or how they understand the violence they are experiencing in 9 Balkan countries, which are also written here. So these are some basic data. Exposure rates for psychological violence were between 64.6%, which was the highest in North Macedonia, and 83.2% in Greece for a lifetime. So they were measuring a lifetime exposure to violence and past year exposure to violence. And past year exposure to violence, psychological violence was 59.62% in Serbia and 70% in Greece. These were the highest for psychological violence. Regarding physical violence, the exposure varied between 50.6 in North Macedonia and 76.3 in Greece for lifetime exposure, and 42.5 in North Macedonia and 51% in Bosnia for past year prevalence. Regarding sexual violence, the highest was lifetime violence was in Bosnia, 18.6, and lowest was in North Macedonia, 7.6. Lifetime contact sexual violence was the highest in Bosnia, also 9.8%, and lowest in Romania, 3.6. Self-reported neglect was highest for both past year and lifetime prevalence in Bosnia, 48% and 20.3%, and lowest in Romania. Regarding violence against women, when we talk about Western Balkan countries, legislation on gender-based violence started by adopting some specific laws to fight primarily domestic violence. So there was the laws usually do not recognize domestic violence as being is being a part of a gender-based violence more widely understood. So the laws often, and also in practice, officials dealing with this avoid this gendered approach. A major change was in 2011, of course, by adopting the so-called Istanbul Convention, which is ratified by all Western Balkan countries, although the implementation is questionable. Police and court responses to protection still remain inadequate. In all Western Balkan countries, they usually lead to re-traumatization of victims of gender-based violence and domestic violence. Data collection, as I said, on gender-based violence is a big issue in all Western Balkan countries. They are either not complete, they are not done in coordination with all the institutions in charge of the gender-based violence. And these are the cases in some of the countries of the Western Balkan route of femicide during 2021, which is the last data, official data that they could find on femicide. So there were 12 cases in Albania, 9 in Bosnia, 2 in Kosovo and 2 in Montenegro, 6 in North Macedonia, and 20 in Serbia. When we talk about Serbia, research findings are usually concentrated on experiences of children, on types of violence children usually survive, but statistical data is also very difficult to find. Violence against Serbia is, of course, widespread. It's in different forms. The children survive all types of violence, and they survive it in different contexts. So usually it's family, it's in school. Also, very researched is violence on the internet, but also there's some types of violence that are more complex. So they are presented in a more structural forms, such as child marriage, child labor, or through multiple social exclusion, which is really in Serbia, it's not really being followed, or interventions for these types of violence are not formed, or are formed in a very non-organized way. Children are also not sufficiently recognized as victims when there is gender-based violence or domestic violence or intimate partner violence between the parents. So children's emotional, physical, and psychological development is not being recognized in this violence that is happening between the parents. This is some of the data that I managed to find for Serbia. 70% of children were exposed to at least one case of psychological or physical violence while growing up. Over 1/4 of children felt that they had been neglected at least once. More than 8% of children experienced sexual abuse at least once. I don't have data for contact sexual violence here. And violence between adults in the household, which is also considered a violence against children, although it's not recognized as such, was witnessed by 38% of children. Regarding violence against women, as I said, violence is usually recognized as a domestic violence, not and very small number of professionals are recognizing it as a gender-based violence, so including the gender perspective. Serbian legislation does provide that authorities can protect the domestic violence survivor by temporarily removing the perpetrator from the home for a minimum of 48 hours to a maximum of 30 days. So by law, institutions that are in charge of dealing with domestic violence and gender-based violence in Serbia are police, prosecutor's office, courts, and social welfare centers. These are closed centers for social work in Serbia. They are required to maintain an electronic database on individual cases, but it is not being done, at least not in a coordinated way. It's not harmonized. In 2021, there were, as I said, total of 20 femicides committed in a family partner context. For 2022, we have very informal information that there were 26 femicide cases. There is no database for femicides in Serbia, and also I'm quite sure there is not one in many Western Balkans country. Usually, we learn about femicides when they get into media. So out of these 20 femicides, 5 victims have already reported violence to the officials. When women, some of the research show that when women report violence, it usually results in a warning. And women surviving gender-based violence are reluctant to report violence because they lack trust in institutions. I will talk a little bit about Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm really sorry that our colleague from Bosnia is not here today, and I would invite people from Bosnia, if they're here, to feel free and give comments on this presentation on this part of Bosnia, because it might be that I didn't understand something well. Violence against children and also violence against women in Bosnia and Herzegovina is deeply influenced by the highly complex and decentralized system of administration in Bosnia. Bosnia is divided in many little cantons, which all have its own jurisdiction, and they all collect different data. So the data is also scattered. Also, Bosnia is has ratified the Istanbul Convention, but also has issue in implementation of this convention. This is some data about Bosnia and Herzegovina that I was able to find. We saw the data in this more recent research that Bosnia is somewhere in all types of violence, somewhere really high when assessing, or children self-assessing the violence they are surviving. One more important thing about all Western Balkan countries, not only Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, is there is a high level of tolerance for violence. So the violence or violent ways of upbringing children are very accepted in the culture. So it is considered a normal way to raise children through violence, physical punishing of children. So it is very difficult to recognize people are not reporting, and so on and so on. Regarding violence against women, as I said.
Sorry, Violeta, can we please
yes,
move on, because we are really short without time.
This is my last slide. I will now, this is some data about the violence against women in Bosnia. And I will not tell more. I will just give word to Mariana now to talk about Albania. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Violeta. And as Violeta is explaining the situation in Balkan region, even in Albania, the violence against women is widespread and unfortunately even socially accepted. And the latest national population survey done by Institute of Statistics find out that 1 in 2 women has experienced 1 or more of the 5 types of violence, including intimate partner violence, dating violence, non-partner violence, sexual harassment, or stalking during their lifetime. And from these, 3% of them experience child abuse. Another issue is the experience of violence in the household from the children. So more than 45% of these women experience violence when they had children. Violeta, can you help me with passing to the other slide? We see that the statistics from the last year shows that it remains concerned sexual assault, domestic violence, and femicide in Albania. We are concerned of low level of reporting compared with the prevalence, and there are many challenges and barriers. And as Violeta mentioned, for the Balkan, we saw it in Albania, and we saw it even in the last research that we did with a group of survivors, that they show how criminal justice respond to the victims, including prejudices, mistrust, communication behaviors, victim blaming, and non-punishment. So even are these statistics still, we are concerned of the low level of reporting. Next slide, please. Another concern in Albania regarding the violence against women and children is the trafficking in human beings, and we are very concerned that majority of the cases identified in 2021, these are the latest official figures. So from 154 victims, we found out that 112 were children, and the majority of them trafficked for sexual exploitation, and majority of them are women, and girls are females. Next slide. Another concern for the violence against children, we see that children are exposed to all types of violence and in different environments, and even in schools, even in within the family, especially as a form of discipline, parenting discipline, also exposed to sexual abuse and online. So we see that it's very much concerned that especially the violence that children face from parents as a form of discipline, and one of the UNICEF studies found out that 40% of children have been subjected to psychological aggression, such as yelling or even physical aggression by their parents. And regarding the sexual abuse, 60% from the latest official statistics that I could gather were children. And an increasing concern in our countries is online child trafficking or child sexual exploitation. And one of the UNICEF research found that 1 in 10 children reported at least one unwanted sexual experience through the internet. I would like just to sum up with the experience of our organization. We are an organization that for 20 years works in addressing the issues of sexual violence, trafficking and exploitation, and violence against women. And we have seen that even like other countries, Albania has ratified these important conventions like Istanbul Convention or Councils of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking or Lanzarote Convention. And also we have comprehensive law for child protection and comprehensive law on domestic violence. We miss comprehensive law on anti-trafficking, but still the implementation is far from where should be, and more should be done, especially how criminal justice responds to the survivors of, especially survivors of sexual violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariana and Violeta. It was a really extensive presentation with a lot of data. So I just want to share with everybody that all the presentations will be available for you. So if you want to just check something, or if you need more time to integrate all this information, the presentations will be available to you. We are just going for the short break, 5 minutes, and let's come back at 11 o'clock, and then we will continue with the presentation of our panelists and with a very hot discussion about the topic of connecting, sharing, and learning from each other. See you in 5 minutes. Welcome back. I'm very glad that we can continue this webinar. So we have now introduction of our panelists and a small discussion. Today we will have panelists coming from Victimology Society of Serbia, from National SOS for Women Victims of Violence and for Children. We also have Autonomous Women's Center, Institute for Mental Health of Children and Youth, NGO Athena, and NGO Astra. So a lot of people. And I would like just if you can one by one introduce yourselves, and then we will go and discuss about the topics of connections, merging the gaps, and our possibilities for mapping the needs on the area. I would ask the representative of Victimology Society, Sanja, to introduce herself briefly and to introduce the scope of the organization.
Thank you very much. So hello everyone, good morning everyone. My name is Sanja Ćopić. I'm researcher and president of the executive board in the Victimology Society of Serbia, and also associate professor at the faculty of special education and rehabilitation at the University of Belgrade, where I teach criminology, juvenile justice, victimology, violence against children, etc. So Victimology Society of Serbia is a non-governmental organization which was founded 25 years ago, so in 1997, with the aim to work on the development of victimology, improvement of the position of victims of crime, war and human rights violations, and protection of victims' rights, regardless of their gender, religion, ethnicity, and other personal features. We are very proud that we are a part of the SVRI network, and that as far as I know, Victimology Society was the first organization from this part of the world, so from the Balkan region and Southeastern European region, to get a grant to conduct a very important victimization survey on sexual violence against students at universities in Serbia. But we can discuss that a little bit later. And we learned a lot from the colleagues from SVRI and also from other grantees, because we were really able to connect with them, to share knowledge, to share experience, and particularly to share experience in conducted research in the context of pandemics. Just a little bit more about our organization is that Victimology Society of Serbia's mandate includes policy-oriented and feminist action research, drafting of laws and advocacy, victim support, awareness raising, and education. So we find research very important because it creates a basis for advocating for viable policy solutions in Serbia, but also even broader when it comes to the field of victims' rights, and particularly of women victims of gender-based violence. And this is also a basis for really standing up for the rights of all victims. What is the special value of our organization is its commitment to link theory and practice, which is important for the theory of change. And also the fact that we have quite a big number of members, because we are a membership organization, and many of them are really internationally recognized experts in the field of criminology, victimology, victim support, women's studies, children's rights, etc. So our activities are based on a gender-specific and holistic approach to victimization and victims' rights, and all our activities are implemented within two organizational units. One is the VDS Research and Education Center, which aims at development of theory and improvement of the victims' rights on the broader social level. And on the other hand, we also run the first and still the only generic victim support service, VDS Info and Victim Support, which provides assistance and support and referrals to victims of crime in general, including victims, women victims of gender-based violence. In general, our activities are organized around building evidence and knowledge production, influencing changes in legislation, policy, and practice, supporting victims, building capacities of professionals and NGO activists who are working with victims of crime in general and victims of gender-based violence in particular, and promoting victims' rights. When it comes to building evidence, what is also an important topic of this webinar, I would like to stress that the Victimology Society of Serbia has implemented 36 researches and surveys so far. 15 of them were international, and these were mostly victimological research and surveys. So we did the first prevalence surveys on domestic violence, human trafficking, victim support services. We also did the victimization survey on sexual violence against students at the universities, on victims and restorative justice, victims and reconciliation in post-conflict society, discrimination of women at the labor market, etc. And what is on the other hand important is that these research are not done just for themselves, just to get some data, but to use the data as evidence for advocacy for reforms of legislation, policy, and practice. And we are really proud that our advocacy activities resulted in really important legal changes in Serbia and better legal protection of gender-based violence victims in Serbia, so that based on the proposals provided by our organization and the working group of our organization, 20 years ago, we got domestic violence as a criminal offense. This year, we will also celebrate 20 years of having human trafficking as a separate criminal offense. Changes related to sexual violence, although they are not still completely in compliance with Istanbul Convention, etc. But of course, we need to monitor the implementation of all these laws in practice, which is still not completely adequate. As I mentioned, we run first general victim support service in Serbia, and this year we will also celebrate 20 years of running it, providing emotional support, information, referrals, and also witness support to victims of crime. We also publish Journal Temida.
Sorry, Tanya.
Yes, I will wrap up. Just to mention Temida, because you already mentioned, Liesl already mentioned it, it is an academic journal when we publish papers on victimization, gender, human rights, and you can read about SVRI forum in the latest issue. And I will also just a little bit later share the link to the book on sexual violence at the universities, and we can discuss that a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanya. I know that the scope of work you are doing is amazing and huge, and I really hope that we will have more time to discuss about it. Let us just move on to our representative of the Child Helpline and also the SOS for women who are dealing with domestic violence. So Costa, please, the floor is yours.
Anita, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Costa Gajic, and I'm the head of the National Children's Line of Serbia and SOS Telephone for Women who have experienced violence. And I will try to briefly present our work. Maybe for the beginning, it's important to stand out some professional context. Next slide, please. We are a part of Center for the Protection of Infants, Children, and Youth, which is a social protection institution that through accommodation services provides care for children and young people whose right to family life is threatened. Many years of experience in working with children and their families has determined us to use our resources, and for the last 20 years, our institution provides programs and services aimed at preventing institutionalization and separation of children from the family, but also for preventing and reporting violence, among which are National Children's Line and SOS Telephone for Women who experience violence. Next slide, please. So, National Children's Line of Serbia is a telephone counseling service that allows all children in Serbia to receive counseling support at any time by calling the toll-free number 116-111 if they find themselves in circumstances in which their rights are threatened or in any other situation. By that said, NADEL is a service for the prevention and reporting of violence against children and young people. Our mission is to respond to the needs of children, whether they are in difficult life situation or at risk of abuse and neglect, and to be able to enable their concerns and needs to be heard in society. But we think it's really important that since the establishment in 2005, NADEL counselors have received more than 1.5 million telephone calls from children from all over Serbia and provided more than 70,000 counseling session, which represents a significant source of data and significant source for further research. All calls are free, anonymous, confidential, and accessible. And therefore, beside the phone line, we are also providing e-counseling, which means counseling by chat or email communication. For this webinar today, I think it's really important that we also stand out networking, and the part of the NADEL is the part of the World Organization of Child Lines, CHI, or Child Helpline International, which enables a large database and evidence-based advocacy for all its members, and we think that it's really important to think about evidence-based advocacy. We are also in contact and cooperation with regional partners, with regional child helplines, so that we find really important. And the final slide, please. Also, SOS Telephone for Women with experience of violence is national counseling telephone service that works 24 hours, 7 days a week, and it is intended for women who are exposed to violence and other family members also. We think the mission of the SOS Telephone is to provide counseling support to women, to empower them to get out of the cycle of gender-based domestic violence, and also to advocacy women's rights in our community. I think that I'm reaching out to the end of the time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I will stop now and make sure that everyone else have time, but we can talk about a bit later.
Thank you so much. We will definitely continue to this discussion after we hear a little bit about Autonomous Women's Center. So please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sanya, coming from the Autonomous Women's Center. I'm a journalist with MA in Gender Studies and currently a PhD student at the University of Belgrade. I'm here with my colleague Tanya Ignjatovic, and it's quite a challenge to present the work of the Autonomous Women's Center in 2-3 minutes, as we were founded back in 1993. So this year we are actually marking our 30th birthday. Our work is based on feminist principles and theory. And as you can see on the screen, our mission is that we believe that a life without violence is a basic human right. Accordingly, we provide specialist support to women and encourage individual and institutional response to male violence against women, thus contributing to strengthening of the civil society. Just to be quite short, I will be presenting on the next slide. I will be presenting our 4 strategic directions that are still active. We are in the process of planning of our next strategic plan. So for us, direct support to women with the experience of violence is the crucial thing that we are doing all these years. And on the right side of the slide, you can see what is the goal of this strategic direction. Besides that, we are also working on strengthening social support to women for a life free of violence. We are influencing the institutional framework for the protection of women against violence, and yes, as a part of this strategic plan, our internal direction is to strengthen the autonomy and sustainability of us as a feminist organization. A lot of our, I think most of our research, policy, advocacy activities are all based mostly on our experience of direct support to women survivors of violence. And this direct support, I think Sanya already mentioned, this gives us not just evidence, it gives us knowledge about how do women live, what are the experiences they have, what do they face, not only when it comes to violence, but also when it comes to reporting violence to institutions and different settings. So in this matter, the most inspiration that we have for all of our activities is based on this direct support, and I believe there's a lot of knowledge in not just at the Autonomous Women's Center, but in all women's organizations who are providing direct support. There's a lot of knowledge on how women live, and in that sense, the research is something that should be in a way extracted from this. On the next few slides, we have gathered some of the researches that we have done in the past few years. On this slide, you can see, and I will share the links in the chat. Also, I will be a little bit updating the presentation, and as I think it will be shared with everyone after the webinar. So on this slide, you can see some of the researches that we have done with young people, with youth in secondary schools, and also with teachers, as we are working both with youth and with teachers with the aim to prevent gender-based violence and intimate partner violence in youth partner relationships. On the next slide, you will also see some of the recent researches when it comes to prostitution and how prostitution is punished and how women in prostitution are actually punished in front of the courts in Serbia. We have also added some links to the researches on femicide, what we did, and on the next slide you will see some policy documents. Not all of them are available fully in English, but there's a summary in English. So as I said, I will be sharing the links in the chat, and I will, for now I will stop, as I think I have made it in 2 or 3 minutes, but I'm also open to discussions and to questions and comments, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much also because of your mindfulness for the making this very short. I know it's very difficult. I would like now to invite the representative of the Institute for Mental Health to share a little bit about their scope of work.
Yes, hello, my name is Teodora. I'm from Institute for Mental Health. We are very old here, so I will use this opportunity to invite you to our 60th anniversary in April this year. We are a general psychiatric hospital, so we are not dealing only with violence, but with general psychiatric states and illness. But we are very based on evidence, on research and scientific institute. We were first psychiatric institution in this part of Europe oriented towards social psychiatry and treatment in the social environment. We were insisting on social and psychological methods of treatment for psychiatric disorders. But beside of this, we are very, very experienced in the child protection on the first place, because we had a team for child protection almost 23 years now, and we have a new team for protection of women, which is working about 3 years. Can you go forward with the slides, please? Please, one more. So I wanted to just tell something about our procedure in the child protection team. We are having every week a meeting where we report our cases in our databases or outside. Speaking in terms of sexual violence, we had in 5 years statistics, we had only 7 boys and 42 girls detected in our hospital, which is not, I think, too much for valid research, but we must think about Corona period when half of our staff were working in some COVID hospitals. But for women, the team is more, I'm ashamed of the number of cases we had in 2020. 3 reported women, 2021 2, and the last year 2 women were reported as victims of violence. So we really need the help of all of you and to share knowledge and to share data for research, because our samples are very, very small, as you see. So I think this was my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Theodora. It's an impressive and extensive work behind you. And I guess it's a very important year for everybody since we are having so many anniversaries all together. So let's move on to NGO Athena. Can you please present a little bit about the organization?
Thank you, Anita. As you mentioned, anniversary, I will take the opportunity to congratulate the colleagues from Mažec and the colleague from Institute for Mental Health on their anniversary, and to mention that a few days ago, actually, we had 20th anniversary of NGO Athena. So we will continue with special dates and decades, actually. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Andriana, and I will present the work of NGO Athena. I'm a coordinator of direct support for the victims of human trafficking and gender-based violence in NGO Athena, but also I'm educator of family systemic psychotherapy. So further on, to try to explain a little bit in this 2 to 3 minutes what NGO Athena is doing. So basically 20 years ago, few brave women decide to raise the question of human trafficking and actually protection of victims of human trafficking in Serbia. Predominantly 20 years ago, those were the women who were not citizens of Serbia, but actually who came from neighbor countries on South Balkans. During the years, the situation changed, and mostly nowadays we are speaking about the women who are exploited and trafficked in Serbia and who are resident of Serbia. Besides that, there is some population of women who are in a status of refugee and migrant who suffer gender-based violence and human trafficking during the route and in the country of origin, but also in the Serbia. So those are also the beneficiary of our program. So what we are actually doing, we are tend to conduct comprehensive long-term support program for the victims of human trafficking and gender-based violence, predominantly for women and children. Next, please. What we are proud of is that we tend to create and to respect a tailor-made approach. And I assume that most of you is aware of the definition and the meaning of this kind of approach, but when we, in 2015, actively involved in providing support for refugee and migrant women and girls in Serbia, we noticed that there is a lack of support for these women from the state institution, and there is a lack of recognition of gender-based violence and harmful tradition, norms and standards that occur to this woman. So besides the population that we already worked with, that is the population of human trafficking victims in Serbia, we start providing shelters for victims of gender-based violence among refugee and migrant population. In 2015, we had 4 safe houses that we run for refugees and migrant women and children, and also minor boys, and 1 accommodation for the victims of human trafficking in the domestic population. Today, we have 2 safe houses because situation and demographic statistic of refugee and migrants have changed in the last 7 or 8 years. So today we are running licensed program for victims of human trafficking, living with support, assisted housing, and we are running a safe house for victims of gender-based violence among refugee and migrants. Next, please. So the idea is to create a long-term support program for both of population of beneficiaries that we are working with, and the idea is to provide all the needed services at one place. So we are covering all the areas and all the issue and questions regarding the social needs and the other needs in which person who's experienced women and girls who experienced violence can be affected. So idea is through a 5-unit program to provide the sustainable and the support that will be continuous. So, as I mentioned, we are providing assistant housing, but we are also, through the field support team, providing the support to those who are living outside of Belgrade or outside of our accommodations, and who are living in the private address of the other institution and who need some kind of support through this team. We are also running reintegration center, and that is a place where I'm based right now. So it's designed, and the idea of reintegration center is to create some kind of service in the community where all women and children who are in risk can come to seek for information or to receive any other kind of support. We are also conducting economic empowerment program, and I will speak a little bit more about it when I mention our social enterprise further on. And the something that we are the youngest child of our NGO is the peer, advocacy group that started as a peer support group that is made from the advocacy group is made, and the idea of advocacy group came from the women and girls who once were beneficiary of our program. Today, their advocacy group who is meeting with the professional stakeholders and different actors in the system, trying to advocacy for the change and for better support for victims of human trafficking and gender-based violence. Further on.
Diana, can you please wrap it up, because we have very little time.
Okay, we can skip to the next slide, please. So I mentioned the economic empowerment program, and the crown of that program is our social enterprise Bagel shop that is quite recognized worldwide. And why this social enterprise is very important is that it's not only the place for employment of women and girls with experience of violence, but it's also a place for the training and for the practice. Next. And just quickly on the end, but I will leave the links in the chat. Some of the research that we done quite recently, one of them, two of them actually are tackling the issue of gender-based violence in digital surroundings, cyber gender-based violence. One it's called In Front of the Screen, and the other is called Behind the Screen. And something that we are very dedicated in the last 2 to 3 years is come on the publication in 21 through one case study of violation of the right of privacy and confidentiality of data when it comes to the child victim of trafficking. And I will leave the links below so you can check the other resources and publications that we've done in the previous years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There is so many things that are really great about the Athena's work. But let's move on to NGO Astra, and then we will have some time also for the discussion. So please.
Thank you, Anita. So I just realized how optimistic was my presentation since we have so short time. So I'll just try to be brief and focused. NGO Astra, anti-trafficking action has, so please, next slide, thank you, has focused its main program like strategic 4 programs regarding. One of them is prevention, education, and campaign, which means that we really work on raising awareness about this issue, and we are focusing on work with youth. So we go with peer team and educate children in schools and work with students, because this is where we have the opportunity to change their opinion, to deliver them with enough preventive information, so in order to they can protect themselves. Then I need to mention victim assistance program and the direct assistance to victims, which is our actually main focus, and all informations which are gathered here are used then for our researches, for our advocacy campaigns. Among some, I will mention among some of the important advocacy initiatives and campaigns, I will mention just a few, like Victim Compensation Fund, then initiative for impunity of the victims for crimes which they committed during their time in exploitation, and I will mention also then the initiative for national rapporteur for combating human trafficking, which actually was adopted in second half of 2021. So the Republic of Serbia now officially do have the national rapporteur for combating human trafficking. Concretely, with direct assistance, in the past 20 years of Astra, more than 20 years actually, that Astra has been operating, we supported more than 580 victims, among whom were children, women and girls in highest percentages, children with percentages of 32% and women with 78 percentages. Trends are really changing in last few years, and we do keep record on them. But what is really obvious is that more children involved in human trafficking chain, more the children victims who are multiply exploited, not just one form of exploitation. It's always mixed forms of exploitation. So it's really challenging to support them, because that's one gap that we also notice. You do not have systematic approach specialized for the children victims of human trafficking, and our focus is actually on that area of work, and our work for now and for further on is actually regarding that subject. We can move on. Thank you. Among services that Astra is providing to the victims is medical services, legal aid, protection of secondary victimization, psychological support, providing alternative accommodation, and support for repatriation. It is important to mention that we have victim-centered approach. Also, it is important to mention that we respect the dynamics of recovery for each victim. So we do have intensive work with victims, because you cannot put each client in any kind of format, because every victim is individual, and you need to have separate time for each victim, and to give them opportunity to think, to reflect, to overcome everything what they survived. So next slide, please.
Can you please wrap it up?
Okay, then I'll just point out this one, because what we have noticed is that more and more female victims are exploited for so-called hidden work, domestic work, because you have that climate in Serbia that is something that women do, that is unpaid, and job that is not very, you cannot see that easily. So that is rising trend in our work. Domestic workers are generally more vulnerable to obligation to provide work for a private individual, exercising low or no salary. So we are hoping that we can raise awareness about how much women are exploited in domestic work and how difficult it is to see that. So I will send links for our publication and the researches, and then I will leave time for discussion, and if you have any questions for me.
Sorry, thank you so much. I do realize that it is quite hard to put so many years and so many research findings in just a couple of minutes. And for me, it was such an empowering experience to hear you all together. And even though I know how you work and what you do, just hearing you all together is somehow so empowering, and it gives us strength to work together. I would like also to invite you to reflect a little bit about why we need all this evidence, why this is important in our work, and according to you, what are the gaps in the area. So whoever wants to start first.
Maybe I can just a short remark. I think that the research is really very, very important because only if we really have research, different victimization or other researches or surveys, we could try to follow the phenomenon to see whether we have more or less different forms of violence against women, against children, etc., because we cannot get that from the official statistics. Because official statistics, yes, they are important, but there are a lot of lacks, and we could see that from Violetta's presentation. And official statistics may speak more about the efficiency of the state institutions in responses, but we cannot get the real data on the scope and characteristics of different forms of violence against women and children from these data. And this is why it is important to have research, and maybe to have research on a broader level, so to connect, for example, in the Balkan regions, to get more comparable data, which is also important for us. And that is also relevant for monitoring the way how the laws and policies are implemented in practice, and whether we have to advocate for further reforms or not. So in order to get any kind of changes, I think that we really need this kind of data.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with you. Does anyone want to add up also about the gaps in the area?
I would agree with Sanja totally, but I would add that by the evidence, we can also, according to the evidence and following the evidence, and following the phenomena, we can also prevent the worst case scenarios. And we notice in the last decades or even more that the worst case scenarios are often happening in Serbia, and that for every time we are acting that like it happened the first time. We are not learning from it, and we are not adapting the new and the better practice. And when it comes to the gaps, I think the biggest gap in the region, not only in Serbia, it's actually that we are copy-pasting a lot of regulation and a lot of practice that are not followed by efficiency study or any kind of evidence-based studies. And we don't know it would be able to be adapted in Serbia. We're just copying it and putting it out like it's the only way to do things. And I think that with cooperation in the region and with exchanging of our practices and exchanging of our evidence, we can better follow the trends. And we're often hearing like things that are happening now in Europe for 10 years will happen in Serbia. So I think that we need to learn from the other experience, but that we also need to follow our own path and our own circumstances, social circumstances that we are facing. So I think that the evidence-based practice will help in that, and evidence-based research will also come with our solution and our own adequate response to the phenomenon that we are facing here in this region.
Yeah, I completely agree also about the issue of scaling up the services and adapting them to our needs. There is so much space in that, and thank you for reminding us about it. Anyone else want to share about the gaps? So the other question is, how do you feel why this is important that we come together, that we form a network and that we share and connect between each other? So what are the benefits of sharing and connecting? How do you feel about it?
Well, I can add something to that point. I think that what Adriana and Sanja already said, I don't want to repeat their words. I think as we all said, there's a lot of knowledge, but there needs to be exact data in order to have better policy, better advocacy, better ways of changing the society. When it comes to building connections, I think it's quite important for the region, as we all are living in a very similar cultural but also legal background in a way. Still, we have some laws from the Yugoslavia times and etc. So in that sense, it makes sense. We are all living also in post-conflict societies. So that's also something that is quite specific for this region. When I was thinking about this question, it also came to my mind one example that, for example, in Croatia, they have adopted a criminal act called sexual intercourse without consent. And it's actually some kind of lighter form of rape with lower penalties. And from there, we have learned from their experience how will that be implemented in practice, and we managed to stop this from happening here in Serbia. We still need to change the definition of rape in our criminal code, but this was not the way, and this is how we learned that this was not the way. So in that sense, I think that the regional cooperation and exchanges of knowledge and experiences is quite important, not only for exchanging of good practices, but also for the bad ones.
Yes, of course, I agree with you so much. I do believe that there is so much taboo in the area of the bad practices, and that we do not share, like we are a bit ashamed when the things go wrong. And that's the way that we cannot even prevent it in the future if we do not address it. So the biggest difference that I found between our domestic Balkan countries and the international ones is that we are kind of afraid of sharing our mistakes. So, and the mistakes are the points where we are learning from. So you're quite right. And also in the research methods, I would agree that we need to share much more. I know as a researcher that sometimes I miss like those inputs of where the things went wrong. in the research techniques with vulnerable groups. So I agree with you. Anyone else want to share why the connection and sharing among Balkans? Yes, Tanya?
I also think that it is very important to share and to connect. Maybe it can make easier paths towards funding, maybe for us, for research, because it is very hard to get funding for research in our countries, at least in Serbia. Particularly when it comes to the social sciences, and we are in the field of social sciences. So I think that it is also very important, and particularly if you keep in mind what Elizabeth said at the very beginning, how we lack actually funds and sources in order to conduct research, which is important. So maybe this might help us in getting some funds to do research on a broader level. And I think also, Anita, that we have some questions in the chat, maybe someone would like to answer.
Yes, if anyone has a comment about why would we benefit to connect more in the region, or if not, we can go to the questions. Yes, Costa, please.
I think also I will not try to say all the things we already heard, but connection and connecting in region can help us with some kind of fine tuning with the phenomenon and the researches we are doing, and to make sure that interventions can be suited more for our context, and for that part I think it's really important to share experience, to share knowledge, and things that we all do that we are proud of, and things that we are less proud of.
Yes, I agree. We are very proud nations altogether, but also it would be great if we would be proud to share more and to connect on a deeper level so that we can grow together, because that's the way we are stronger. If you agree, I would like to just address one of the questions that Elizabeth shared here, coming from Helen. She's interested to hear experiences of the violence perpetrated and targeting of those supporting survivors, including human rights defenders, including how this is being tackled. Who would like to answer to this?
May I?
Yeah, sure, Mariana.
Because even I type it, what we have experienced has been mostly threats that came from perpetrators or from traffickers, and even in order to prevent or to address this issue, because it's a concern to the service providers. We train even our team on security issues, but also we cooperate with police, or shelter is protected with security guards, etc. But I agree with her suggestion that it's a lack of research in this area. So this might be an issue that we can see it jointly together, not only in Balkans, but maybe broader. Thank you.
If I may add to...
Yes, please.
I will totally agree with her, but also to add to this question, I think that we need to be quite honest here, and as a representative of NGO, to be honest and to admit that from time to time we are targeted by the government and by the political climate in this area, and that we are also suffering different kind of pressures and threats from the part of the government system, and that is also the question that we remain mostly silent when it comes to this region, but actually it is important questions that we need to raise more.
Thank you. Yes, Tanya.
Yes, I would like to add to what Adriana just said. I completely agree with both her and Mariana. I would also like to add that in a way of closing the circle with the first question that we started, the evidence is also important for us as women's NGOs, in order to be able to create more trust of the public in us, because we are, as Andriana said, we are sometimes targeted as those crazy feminists or someone who is trying to destroy the family and the usual things that we get from the public, but also sometimes from the government. And in that sense, I also would like to close the circle, as I said, and to say that evidence is also important in this capacity of building trust between us as women's NGOs and the public and the women who are approaching us.
Yes, I completely agree with you, as we are living still in the very patriarchal society, and it's patriarchal not only the society, but also the politics, the main politics. So it does influence the opportunity of reframing the violence and how it influences and where it influences all of us. So it's as the feminists say, the personal is political. So we do need to raise the voices and to be heard more. And data research is important. What I also find is that we have so many research here, and also so many of you have presented the findings. What we do like is this interconnection and comparable research, and the research that would cover the region. Those bigger research could tell us much more about what's happening in the Balkans area and not solely in the one of each of the countries. So to have a better insight in what's there and how we can deal with it, both the good sides and the pitfalls as well. So I don't know, do we have any other questions here? No? Does anyone wants to comment or to reflect before we try to close this? Yes, Elizabeth, please.
I just wanted to reflect on the sort of the richness of the work that's going on in the region, just to echo what you were saying, and how important to have these discussions, but also just on the last points around the backlash and the importance of civil society to be able to work in a way that they don't feel hampered by various external and sort of mischievous forces that don't want us to do this work for a whole variety of reasons. And I was wondering also the extent to which we feel threatened by or feel like we are facing barriers to actively working online because of online violence as well. And how do we come together to really address that? Because I think it's not just offline violence that we face as women's rights organisers and civil society dealing with women's rights issues and violence against children. It's also the online violence. And that in turn is a real impact on democracy and freedom of speech and all the important things that we hold dear. Freedom of speech meaning being able to actively, as women, engage online about issues that might be sometimes threatening to the groups that are anti-feminist or the incels. I'd be interested to hear the experiences that we're having within this region and some of the strategies, and also to think through how can we work together as a collective to try and address some of the backlash and but work together to mediate or moderate or mitigate some of the harms that online violence is having, which of course is linked to offline violence as well.
Yes, does anyone want to comment?
I can add just quickly. We tried to raise that question with the two research that we mentioned, but I think that here we are still raising the questions among the general population about gender-based violence that is happening online, and that we are not totally aware of the consequences of it and the rage of it. So as I mentioned, we conducted two research. One was with high school girls from 18 to 19 years old, and the evidence and the conclusions that we made with the that research showed that more than 50% of them experience some kind of violence. But I think that is not something new. I think that we all assume that, I mean, at least all of us who are working in the field. But what personally, for me, was something that I cannot say that I was surprised, but I was terrified more with that, is that most of them suffered directly something that can be defined as a gender-based violence, but they didn't recognize it as a gender-based violence, and they remain silent to that. And the other evidence is that 90% of them said that even if it happened again, or something more severe happened again to them, they will not report to anybody from the responsible actors. So I think that that's showing not only that they don't have trust. I think that generationally there is a lack of trust in institution. And I don't think that we as feminist organizations and as women in Serbia are any different from that. My conclusion from this year spent in the field is that if something happened to me, I would not be sure if I would go to the police or if I would go to the state institution. And it's terrifying, actually, but it's that we are all living in. And it's difficult to work in that area, but also when it comes to, once again, to cyber violence, I think that we are lacking regulations, even though we are often saying that laws in Serbia are well written, but I think that we are still lacking the regulation, and that we are lacking the trust and support that we can provide from stakeholders to those who are testifying about their experience online. So I think that we need to start with that before we raise any campaigns and before we call young girls and women to report more, because we are aware of the answer that they will face if they do that.
Thank you, Adriana. This is indeed very important question, and I do believe that we need much more time to discuss about this. But you opened up a very important topic, as we do need not only to raise the awareness, but also to connect among ourselves so that we feel empowered in our own groups if we cannot get the safety coming from the state side. So maybe this is one of the opportunity when we share and connect and see that we are all together with the same agenda, and then we can provide much more support to those who are in need. And I do believe that one of the ways also in connecting. So before we all leave, I would just ask Liesl to share the word cloud with us and a very short evaluation of this webinar so that we can briefly answer and then we can say goodbye to each other.
Thanks, Anita. So at the beginning, we've asked you, why is it important for us to work together? And this is what people said. So just very quickly, some solidarity, empowerment, learning, good connection, sharing, safety, to be supported, to share good practices. So we'll put this up online as well. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. And then just with the evaluation, we just have a very quick poll just to ask you how you find this webinar. So if we could ask people just to take just a minute or two just to quickly answer these 3 questions, we'd really appreciate that, just to improve in future. I've put it up on screen and I'll just give you about, a minute or 2.
Thank you so much, Liesl. Thank you all for coming here, for sharing all your experience and all your work, and also for trying to put it in such a short time frame. I do believe that we would benefit of connecting more and sharing our inputs more. So thank you also, Elizabeth and Liesl, for sharing with us the abundance of the opportunities and also the materials that you have in the SVRI forum. I really believe that after this webinar, a lot of people from the region is going to visit your website and explore it and use the opportunities to learn and to share and also to connect more. So I do believe that this is just the first step that we made together today, and I hope that in some time we are going to celebrate also some anniversaries together of making these connections. So thank you all. We will share materials with you and a short update of what we achieved today, and let's hope that we are going to continue and grow all together. Have a nice day today. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.